Hey everyone, welcome back to the GattoCast. Dear human beings, tonight we got a very special guest that I'm going to show you straight away. His name is Karl Farrugia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's like that.
Okay, great.
Farrugia.
So you pronounce it the Italian way, right?
Yes, it is. It is.
All right, so tonight we're going to talk about multilingual metal music, which I think the title is pretty much self-explanatory. I don't think there's much to add there.
No.
But the devil is in the details because we're not going to talk about metal music. I mean, we're not going to talk about a metal band. We're going to talk about a former metal band tonight, which is Nanowar of Steel. That is the band that I happen to be part of. But the the subject, so the subject we're going to deal with is the former metal past of Nanowar of Steel, right?
Yeah.
And some kind of cultural studies. Can you tell me some? So first of all, can you introduce yourself to the audience and tell something about yourself? So your background, where are you from, and what you study?
Sure. Sure. So yeah, my name is Karl Farrugia. I'm from Malta, actually. But I currently live in Norway. Well, my background, yeah, I study mainly Old Norse philology and Old Norse and Viking Age history. So I did. I just finished my master's last year in Viking and medieval age studies. Um, Yeah, and that's mainly what I do. Basically, that's my real subject. Let's put it this way, in inverted commas.
All right, but what, why then did you publish this article on Nanor of Steel and metal multilingual metal music?
So the thing is that metal studies is actually really interesting, especially when you combine it with Viking Age studies, because there's a lot of
Okay,
studies about how Vikings are used in heavy metal. In this case, what happened is that some friends of mine organized this conference at UCL, University College London, where I
yeah,
did my undergraduate. And they told me that they're going to organize it, and they told me, yeah, well, you should submit a paper. And I didn't want to do it on Viking studies. I knew that one of the keynote speakers would do it, and she's an expert on that. So I decided to go to something completely different, and I chose Nanowar because, well, languages. And the conference was about multilingual metal, so how metal is used and languages are used in metal. So I
nice.
thought that Nanowar is a perfect example for the use of multiple languages.
That's cool. I mean, I remember that you got in touch with me back then, and then I would have liked to join the conference, but I couldn't because I
Yes.
used to have a another job, so it was not so easy to
Yeah.
travel
Yeah.
overseas and get to that conference. But can you tell me something about the conference? So first of all, like me as a metalhead, uh, like I'm interested in knowing like who's studying us, like who's like using me and other and fellow metal music players
Yeah.
as subjects. Are they
So I
metalheads? Are
think,
they like people that are into the scenes? Do they do it just out of
oh yeah,
curiosity or?
oh yeah. I mean, most of them are usually metalheads themselves. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen anyone who does metal studies who is not a metalhead, which was I mean, actually really amazing. When I went to the conference, usually when I go to academic conference, everyone is kind of like, you know, on their best behavior. Everyone is dressed up, But the metal conference, everyone was in metal shirts. It was great.
Okay.
Um, So that's cool. But the thing is that metal studies, what I love about it, it's a very common thing nowadays in academia, especially in humanities, is the study of topics rather than fields. And metal is perfect because it can be anything, really. You can look at it from a sociological point of view. You can look at it from a musical point of view or as a linguist. It's a topic that can encompass everything. It's very kind of multidisciplinary, which is really cool. So you can look at it from multiple angles, and you're still using the same topic.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I think so. It's because I guess that most of us like musicians don't really think about these
Yeah,
substances about the subject. Like I
yeah,
think it's something that comes after that, and then I mean, of course, it makes
mm.
sense. Like I don't think um, Michelangelo back then was painting stuff and thinking, oh, someday someone is gonna do some
Yeah,
stuff like what
exactly,
I'm doing right now.
exactly. But also the fact that it's a subculture. So you can look at it from a cultural point of view and how subcultures work within another culture, and then maybe you can look at it, for example, in, I don't know, just for example, how subcultures and like metal subculture works in a third world country, for example, or in different religious settings. It's always you can look at it from multiple angles, because it's not only music, it's a subculture. There's a certain level of language difference in a way, or at least like slang that is used between us, that makes no sense to outsiders. So it's very cool because of all these different aspects.
So, do you think, like, within this? So, this is something that. Sorry, I'm gonna ask a question that I hate when people ask me as an astrophysicist,
Sure.
like, as an academic in my field. I get asked. So, um, what do we do with this? Like, what's the usefulness of doing this kind of studies?
It's interesting.
Okay.
That's pretty much it. Now, that's the thing. I know exactly what you mean. I do humanities. As I said, I do Viking studies. What is there to it? Like, what can you do with it? It's interesting. It's always interesting to kind of look at how society works. It's always interesting to look at how people work.
Yeah.
As a humanist, as someone who does humanities, of course, I find sometimes that the lack of humanities is a problem. People who do technology, for example, without going into the philosophy of it is a problem. And you see the disaster they leave behind without thinking about things, and that's what we do. So I think it's important to get people in humanities to look at your work, check your work before you do something.
Yeah. Okay.
I know that you're a scientist, and I maybe don't agree. For example, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example for this. There was a series on Netflix about social networks, social dilemma.
Yeah.
And I was watching it, and there was one part. There was some of the founders of Facebook, or some of the first people who were working on Facebook, saying, "Oh, we were thinking of creating this thing where everyone can meet each other and everyone will be connected. Everyone was like kumbaya," and you can hear everyone in humanity is just slapping their face. Like, no, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. And then you can see what basically Facebook ended up doing. It's kind of banded up people doing weird things and conspiracy theorists. People in humanities know this. We know this. We know how it works. We expect that to happen.
Okay, I mean, I guess, okay, then you can take a scientific approach to this and see how networks, and you will end up with the same results. But I see your point, and I mean, there's some truth to that, but anyway, let's not talk about complex system. And this is part of complex system dynamics, and I still think about this in terms of mathematical agent-based simulations or stuff like that. It's not the same approach, but I assure you can get to similar conclusions. And
yes.
Anyway, that's not the point of tonight's talk. Maybe next time it will be interesting to make some kind of comparison, because I mean, you said right. I mean, I'm like, my background is completely scientific, but I see myself as I have at least one foot into humanities, as because I like learning languages. I read a lot of literature. I have no formal training in languages, but I mean, I think I can say something about that, like having read and studied some, like also books on linguistics and stuff. So anyway, so let's not take another path, and let's stick to the subject of tonight. But so you said you went to this conference, and so you knew the topic of the conference, right? You knew who the speakers were. And
I knew that the topic would be multilingual metal. So that was something I knew. I kind of knew who one of the keynote speakers would be, at least one or two. I can't remember. It was a very long time ago now. But the people who organized it are good friends of mine, and they told me that they're going to organize it. And that's why I chose to do Nanowar.
But you had some kind of training, some background in like analyzing metal lyrics, or so this is something it's related probably to the whole field of study. So let's say I want to do metal studies. Are there some like exams I need to take? Are there some like courses, seminars I need to attend to? There's like some kind of formal training on the topic. Is there some textbook?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, there are a lot of journals nowadays. There are journals that are published. There's one that was, I believe, started by this Karl Farrugia in Leeds. It's a metal studies journal, and there's also a society of international metal studies that organizes conferences and symposia. There's one annually in Helsinki usually. But the
Yes.
thing is that, yeah, of course,
It's like the Mecca of
obvious.
metal, right?
Yeah,
It's like you
exactly,
need to do a
exactly,
pilgrimage to Helsinki and worship Nightwish, or I don't know.
exactly. And that's the
Children
thing.
Bona, I would say, but
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, in fact, when I went to Helsinki, one of the first places I went to was Lake Bodom. I had to.
okay, nice.
It's obligatory. But the thing is that, yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the great thing about it is that it's a topic rather than a field, right? So you can use any of your training. You can use the historical training if you do Viking studies, for example, which is what I do. You can apply that on it if you want. If you do sociology, you can do it. You do psychology, you can do it. You can do anything really. I've even seen papers going into, depression and psychiatry,
Okay.
and heavy metal. The idea of, so you can do anything really.
By the way, talking about studies, there's this suggestion from Theodore, or whatever it's called. Aspiring students of Nanowar of Popology. Nanowar of Steelology is outdated. And then there's this remark. Yeah. Nanowar of Steelology is field of paleontology nowadays. Yeah. So you see, there's a lot of there's a lot of overlap between different fields of studies. And
Yeah,
maybe, like with Nanowar of Steel, you can go, as Carl just said, you can start with sociology, economics, and then you can move on to, I don't know, demographics or music and up to paleontology right now. So it's great. Great to know. So uh, you said it's like there's so far there's just this journal related to this field. So there's it's like is it a monthly journal? It's a what kind of
it's.
it's like peer
I can
reviewed, I
check
guess,
it.
right?
It's a periodical, exactly. It's a periodical. So it's an academic journal. There's metal studies. There's quite a few, I think, nowadays. And then books like the one where my paper was published, for example, they come out often. Then monographs, so books written by one person,
Yeah.
which are very common, depending on the topic.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very common. It's very common. There's quite a lot of work being done. And in fact, two of the people who organized the conference are they're still doing, I believe, a PhD in the field of heavy metal
Okay.
studies in a way. But for example, one of them is about the representation of women in
Yeah, heavy metal.
Finnish heavy metal. You know,
So let's go back to the conference now, then, before we talk about your paper. And if you can give us about some more details about where the place is, like, because I assume that uh, some of the listeners here might not be really aware of the of how conferences work in academia. What's a
sure,
conference? What's, like, where do they
sure,
take place? What's gonna happen there, and what do people do there? What's the aim of conferences?
sure.
So
So the idea, so first of all, it was organized at UCL. So UCL is University College London, which is one of the universities in London. The best one, of course. I have to say that because I was there. Yeah, of course. Yeah, so it was basically what happens is that people can apply to present, basically, usually by sending an abstract. So it's a short text, usually around 300 to 150 words, explaining what their paper will be about. And then the people organizing the conference will choose the ones that they would like to have. And then you have to prepare the paper, so prepare the presentation, usually it's around 20 minutes, and then you present it in front of the crowd. And in this case, the very common format where the topic was a very specific one, which is multilingual metal, but then it was broken up into sub-fields,
okay,
sub-areas, with 3 or 4 papers in that session. So in my case, I was with 2 others. One of them was about Austrian metal, for example, and the use of Austrian dialect in heavy metal,
okay,
and humor in that case as well. I think he wrote about Alcopop, which is a band from Austria. I think it's Alcopop. Um, so yeah, so that's how it usually works. Then you present for 20 minutes, and then you usually have around 10 minutes for questions from people. And the idea is to present your work, to present what you're working on, or general ideas in your field, was something that you want to work on maybe in the future. And it's also a very good way of meeting other people in that field and getting feedback on your work. So it's also very common for people who are still doing their masters or PhD, for example, where they can get feedback from people in that field in real time. So they're presenting some of their work and they're getting some feedback for it.
So we got this in comments. Do you know? Okay, so I find fascinating the fact that there are so many bands that have interest into speaking unusual languages, and sometimes also creating the new forms of language. So do you know any band that? I mean, was there a panel about bands that made their own language, or they invented some slang, or introduced some new words? Did
No, I
something that
don't think that there
happens, or
was. Yeah, I cannot think of anyone who creates language. I mean, I know people who use created languages, like
okay,
there's Summoning. I think it was. Yeah, I think it's Summoning. It's a black metal band that uses black speech from Tolkien.
okay, yeah,
Um, so it's a very Tolkien heavy band. In fact, I think all of their songs are about Tolkien, are about parts
okay.
of the Tolkien universe. So I know that, but what I find fascinating, I think, in heavy metal, what is very common, maybe compared to other forms of music, or at least pop music or more popular music, is the use of dialects. I think it's much more common to have bands singing in dialects and local languages and minority languages,
Would you say?
which is very cool. Like for example, there's the bands that sing in their own small languages, like Maori, for example, in New Zealand.
They're
Trollfest in a
mentioning
way, yeah.
Trollfest. Yes, they have this kind of German, Norwegian something. I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's
It's a hybrid.
Swedish technically.
Yeah.
Trollfest, even though so Trollfest, yes. I might be mixing them up with another
No,
troll-based
no, no, no.
band.
Trollfest. So there's wait. There's because there's Finn Troll, which
Fintroll
they
is the
sing,
Finnish one. Finnish
but
in
they sing in
Swedish.
Swedish.
That's true. Exactly.
And
Then,
then
yeah,
it's
you're right. Trollfest is the
this
Norwegian one.
Trollfest is Norwegian. We played with Trollfest once, and so
Yes, the Norwegian one. They're very funny
I
as well.
know they
They're
have this
amazing.
kind of mix of German and Norwegian, and they have some.
Yeah, they German, Norwegian nowadays.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I mean, the last time I saw them, at least they usually go out in tracksuits and act Slavic in inverted commas.
Okay.
They're hilarious. They're hilarious.
So, by the way, talking about we're talking about this congress, and so there's I noticed that again your like your panel was called like local, global, authentic, and funny, and so
Yes.
there's all these themes, and I guess it's an interesting point to notice that you know this. I mean, I'm not sure about other genres because I mean, I listen to a lot of other music to be honest, but I'm not really
Mhm.
sure about the use of slang and dialects. And I don't know if there is some kind of quantitative comparison done to like in to see whether in metal it's actually true or it's just an impression. The fact that more bands use
Yes. And I think
dialects.
it's kind of linked in a way to the whole folk metal thing,
Yeah.
that people use folk music and then they use their own local languages. So I know that there are some bands who sing in some of the local Mexican languages, like not Spanish,
Yeah.
like
Oh, okay.
the Quechua, or however you say it, and all of those kind of local
Quechua from
languages.
Peru, I guess. It's and there is the anyway.
Yeah, I know that there's local
Yeah,
languages in South
that's
America and Central
yeah,
America,
yeah,
and they do that. And even like in Ireland, of course, bands that sing in Gaelic,
yeah.
in Irish, even though it's not really a widely spoken language, even in Ireland, unfortunately. But yeah, so it's very common to kind of use this true identity in a way. It's a different way to do trueness in a way, like being true to your own culture in a weird way by using your own language rather than using the language of the capital.
Yeah. So this is a comment. Trollfest lyrics are written in fictional Trollspark.
Trollspark, yeah.
Ah, Nahuatl.
Nahuatl, that's the one. That's the one I was thinking of. Thank you.
But I don't know. So the so talking about languages and dialects, because I'm not sure. Like for example, I would say that in Italian pop scene, there are some regions that just sing in their dialect, like Naples or maybe Sicily,
Yes.
something in the north. Not so much, probably not as much in the south. But so I don't know. In general, I don't. I never really looked in a systematic way into this, but I'm sure that metal probably is more than average. Like it's
Yes.
either it's probably what is this? Because when you listen to pop music, you would probably never listen to a pop band from another country that speaks in another language you don't understand. Whereas in metal, you probably are willing to give up on like understanding the lyrics because you still enjoy
Yes.
the music so much. Whereas I
Exactly.
guess that in
Exactly.
pop music, like lyrics, though, even though I would argue that in most of the cases they are not so deep, or there's not so much
Yeah.
research behind, I would say that people still enjoy like listening to this kind of frivolous, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah. And sometimes I
Words.
actually wonder if bands that sing in their own language are actually more popular or actually more listened to because they sing in a different language. Sometimes it comes across that way, that if some, like for example, if a band sings in Mongolian, for example, and they have
Yeah,
Mongolian throat singing, people are going to enjoy it more if it's in Mongolian rather than if it's Mongolian in English. You know what I mean? It has
yeah.
something to it.
I think it. Talking first-hand experience, I think it pretty much depends on the. For us, like talking about Nanowar, like my experience in that is that it really depends on what you want to say. I mean, you have some lyrics that would not work in English, and some lyrics
Yeah.
that would not work in Italian, like some jokes.
Yes.
I would say, like, if you want to make a parody of a Manowar song, you can use the Italian words for that, acciaio and whatever, like
Sure.
ferro, metal, and so on. But in English, it sounds different. Like it's also the. I mean, again, because we are making like we are referencing a lot to the actual metal scene, which is still nowadays. It's most of that it's in English. But
Exactly.
something I noticed, as you said, then even in the international metal scene, then people appreciate when you do like things in your own language, which I
Oh
do
yeah,
firsthand.
absolutely.
Like
Absolutely. I
like
mean, I see it as here, especially in Norway. I mean, living in Norway, you go to some festivals here, like Inferno, for example, which is a festival that is organized always on Easter weekend, and a huge chunk of the tickets are sold to people outside of Norway, and they come in here and they enjoy bands singing in Norwegian. They actually
yeah,
love them. They follow, and well, they try to sing along, but they doing it in Norway is a bit you made fun of, but no, generally, I mean, people enjoy it. People are willing to listen to Enslaved, for example, singing the old albums in Norwegian,
okay,
even though they have
cool,
no idea what they're singing about. But
cool. So let us move to the paper then. Then you went to this conference
sure,
and you presented this work, and then let me just show this. If you can, yeah, go to the first page. Maybe can you zoom a
yes,
little bit
actually,
on it, and
I'll
so that
open this
people
here.
can read the title unless they already read that. I posted it
Yeah,
today
okay,
on social media, but just zoom a
sure.
little
So
bit
this
if you can
is,
like enlarge the title. I'm not
oh
sure,
yeah,
but
sure,
whatever. It's just to
there it is.
exactly. So I think it's more, yeah, exactly. It's more readable. This way.
So
Great.
no, so basically, what happened is that after the conference was a presentation, as I said, 20 minutes, and then it happens sometimes that in some cases the conference proceedings, so basically the papers that are presented, are published in a book or in a journal or something like that. And this is what happened in this case. So the organizers asked all of us if we're interested in having our paper published, and they asked us to write a formal paper, so something that can be published rather than just us presenting a PowerPoint, which is what the conference was. And this is how the paper came about. And eventually it was published in a book, which actually I have the physical version here, which is called Multilingual
Wow.
Metal.
Cool.
Uh, so
Sorry to
yeah,
interrupt, but we have a nice comment here. When you know the song, but the lyrics are Norwegian by singing na 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 na. It's a nice reference to. So yeah, we can
exactly.
say there is some like common ground between all the songs of all genres and all nations. Is this na 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 la 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 blah 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 whatever it is.
Yes, yes, yes,
It's
yes,
something that we do all the time. So it's
yes,
it's nice. Thanks, Bunzoom, for the yeah. So anyway, you said you presented this paper at this conference, and so first of all,
yes.
if I may ask, where how many people knew about Nanowar of Steel at this place? Was it like a new band for them? Did they
Um,
just hear about
there were a
us?
few. There were a few. I mean, there were a few Italians who
Okay.
definitely knew you. There was, no, there were quite a few actually. I mean, there's people from Austria who knew you, who had seen you live. People from Germany who had seen you. You know, so people knew about you. But this is, you have to remember, this was a couple of years ago. So this was
Before.
before Norwegian reggaeton actually.
Okay. Yeah.
I think nowadays you're a bit more popular
Yeah.
than then. But yeah, this
Yeah.
actually
No.
this was before Stairway to Valhalla was released.
Are you sure? No.
Actually, the conference was before.
Seriously. Because I remember
Yeah,
I
so
was
it
in
was 3 years
Germany.
ago.
Wow. Okay. I remember I was working at the observatory, and I remember I wanted to go to conference, but I don't remember why I couldn't. I mean, I remember why I couldn't because I had to work, but
Sure.
I don't remember whether it was like 2019 or yeah, it was 18 actually. Yeah, before it
Must
was a
be
couple of
18
months
because it was
before it
it was
was
my first year in my
absolutely,
masters,
absolutely, yeah,
so it was 18.
yeah. No, just to I'm just throwing a couple of anecdotes about myself as I like to make some shameless promotion, but
Sure.
it happened to me like when I go to congresses. When I used to go to congresses in astrophysics, I remember the first time was in 2011, I guess the one 2010. I use like half of the t-shirts I have they are like Nanowar t-shirts because every time we print something, then I keep something for myself, and so I always wear them. And it happened to me like a few times at congresses starting 2010 already. I remember that people would say, "Oh, you know this band? Oh, nice, cool." And then they said, "Yeah, I'm bass player, founder." Oh, okay. Well, I don't believe you. I had actually one of my office mates in Israel was also like one day I showed up at the office with the T-shirt, and then would just say, "Oh, you know Nanowar of Steel? Cool." I said, "Well, I play there." And the best part with my students in Spain, I was completely shocked because they knew, of course, about. I mean, of course, not of course, but well, I didn't expect it. But
Yeah.
again, they were also. So I had the students who were also fans of mine. It was a pretty weird situation. I remember I was teaching them, and then I remember we had a festival there in Spain, and then a few days after, they would show up to the festival, and they were like, "Oh, profesor, ¿qué tal?" It was a pretty weird situation. Anyway, so sorry for like putting this in, but I think it was something I wanted to just it's in the context. So anyway, you said so this is the title of the paper, I custodi dell'acciaio
Yes.
inox, language as an interface between the global and the local, in Italian heavy metal demenziale. So can you tell us
Yes.
something about heavy metal demenziale? So what do you mean by this, like as a scholar, and
Sure.
what's the difference, for example, between why would you use, for example, here you said it's a heavy metal demenziale, which is an Italian word, and what's the difference between why didn't you translate this, and what's the difference
Yeah.
from this
So
comedy, and other
So heavy metal demenziale basically is a form of, or metal or rock demenziale, is a form of parody. It's a form of humorous metal or humorous music, comedy music. The thing is that it's a very particularly Italian form of musical comedy that is really hard to translate what it is, because it's very hard. It's not equivalent. It's not enough to say Italian comedy metal, comedy heavy metal. It has to be demenziale. It's a very particular form of comedy where the theme usually is completely out of place for whatever the music is about. So there's the items, the ideas are put completely out of context, and usually that's the source of the humor. So of course, like with Nanowar, there's all these kind of fantasy ideas, and then the song is about going to the shower. It makes no sense.
it's completely logic to me. It sounds I don't see what's
Sure. I mean, people have to take a shower, but it's not something you would expect to listen to in a Rhapsody song, for example. But it's completely off from the theme in a way. It's something you wouldn't
like from the
expect.
stereotype, from what you would expect, yes, right.
Yes, exactly.
It's like
Exactly.
that's something that we aim at, like more or less consciously, like at putting things out of place. Like the
Yes,
songs should sound like
yes.
you think about something, but then it's about something else, and it has create some disconnection between what's your expectation and what's your the thing that you're getting.
Exactly, and that's the thing. So there's the one of the, in a way, founders of the term, or at least of rock demenziale, which is Freak Antoni from Schiantos, also an Italian band. Um, he tried in a way, in his own way, to try to define what this demenziale is. But for example, as you can see in this quote here, even the
Yeah.
description makes absolutely no sense.
Can you read the quote just because then this is going
Sure. So
on
it's
Spotify and so.
So it says a cocktail of pseudo-futurism, dada, goliardery, improvisation, pyrotechnic animation, provocation with the irony of un spettacolo, surreal, and above all, cretinous poetry. Even the description itself makes no sense,
Exactly.
which I think is an excellent definition for the
It's like
genre.
on a
But
meta
even the
level, it
definition
makes
makes no
sense.
sense.
Like you
Yes,
read
it
it,
makes sense in a way.
you understand what it's all about. You still wouldn't be able to describe it with the proper
No,
sentences, I guess. But
no.
yeah,
So in fact, in this part, you can see it if you are watching the video. In fact, I make an example with Python, Monty Python. So I think the closest thing I can think of is in fact Monty Python and Life of Brian, for example, where you have Brian and all the people who are being crucified, and all of a sudden they break into this like really fun song. Always look on the bright side of life while they're dying. There's no bright side of life when you're dying. With that's basically a very, very common thing with it's very similar to demenziale in a way, this completely out of place thing happening,
yeah.
making it completely surreal.
Is there, so if I may ask now, because I'm thinking about this, but is there anyone that did some studies on like the psychological root of this kind? Why does this work? Or what do you think? Then you mentioned that this kind of disconnection is a sort of culture specific that you always see. I mean, you mostly see it, at least you identified it with Italy somehow. You said demenziale, like this kind of thing is Italian. So can you make an example, for example, of other bands from other countries that do sort of kind of comedy, but like apart from what you said right now with Life of Brian, but I would say actual metal bands, and what would be the difference, like in the kind of comedy they make and what we make?
So, for example, I think a lot, like if you're looking, think of bands like Green Jelly, for example. If people are familiar with exactly. So in that sense, it is nonsensical, but it's a different kind of nonsensical, if you know what I mean. It's one of those things that is really hard to put your finger on. I'm not know if you agree with this, but it's really hard to put your finger on the difference between something like Nanowar and Green Jelly. So it's still, there's absurdist thing. That's it's about the three little pigs, and it's absurd, and Rambo shows up. Makes no sense. But in a way, it's almost like with Green Jelly, it's meant to be absurd just for the sake of being absurd. Just because it makes no sense to have three little pigs. But then with Nanowar and other as well, of course, heavy metal demenziale bands, there's this idea of still being within the genre, still being metal, still using things that are very metal, but then having it go somewhere completely different, taking a completely left turn. Like, for example, I don't know, like something like Barbie, for example. Sure, it's about a princess and it's all fantasy-like, but it's about Barbie. It's
By the way, we got a nice. So this, I guess Thiago is from Brazil and is
Yes.
asking about Massacration,
Yes.
which is also
Massacration are great.
one of the bands we
awesome.
get compared to all the time. And I guess like the first time I heard about Massacration was in 2005, and there was some like forum, I guess, and people were talking about us and Massacration like since 2005. So it's 16 years ago, right? So it's like ages ago, and already back then, and people were talking about us and Massacration. So do you see, for example, like I don't know how much you know Massacration, if you can see some differences, for example, in what the kind of.
I'll be honest, I don't. The thing is with Massacration, I got introduced to Massacration way after the paper. I had a Brazilian flatmate in one of the student housing I was in here in Norway, and he told me I'm massacration. The thing is that, yeah, from what I understood, because I'm not familiar with Brazilian culture, or at least I'm not intimately familiar with it, or with the language. I don't speak Portuguese. I know that they have songs in English, if I'm not mistaken, but and I think this is the thing with these kind of bands. You really have to know the local culture in a way to understand all of it. There's a lot of local references, and I think this is the reason why I wrote this paper. In fact, because with Nanowar, the difference is that there's songs that are in English, and they can be understood by any metalhead in a way because they use ideas that are generally metal, globally metal, and then the songs in Italian, especially songs in Italian, are very specific culturally. That if you are not familiar with it, if you are not Italian, or you don't live in Italy, or you haven't grown up with Italian culture, you don't understand it. So like something like Giorgio Mastrota, for example, it's funny even if you read translations of it, but if you don't know who Giorgio Mastrota is, like wow, you're going to lose 90% of the meaning.
Probably, yeah. We did an English version of that. And actually, if I may tell you something, it's that the song was meant to be in English at first.
Oh,
Because
really?
back then when we were not thinking about switching to Italian. I mean, we had a couple of songs in Italian, but it was like not the main line, so to say, of the band. We like it was not like we are always being in a like sort of a more international mindset, so to say, and so that the idea was just write songs in English. But then it turns out that in Italian it sounded much better, and then we stick to that. But
Yeah.
yeah, at first we thought, um, but yeah, that's I see. So you said that okay, this is like using things out of place. So I like this. I like this quote actually. Like as mentioned in introduction to Rock Demenziale, the formula to use themes out of place to the level of banalization is a standard topos in that genre. So, do you know, for example, the band Ultra Vomit from France? Have you heard of
No,
them? Okay,
no, I haven't.
because I think like they have some similarities with us. For example, they have songs about I don't know. They have this Evier Metal. It's a song
Okay.
about it's like water bottles. And then there's
Okay.
one of the it's Kamtar. It's like a Rammstein style song, which is about people driving trucks. So I think they also do that somehow, yeah, to some extent. But
Yeah.
so probably I don't know. You mentioned a lot of bands actually. One of the things that it makes me sort of proud of is that you mentioned Prophylax and Elio Le Storie Tese, besides Cantos that we already mentioned. But in the paper, you explicitly mentioned those two, and especially Elio Le Storie Tese is one of our like
Yeah.
idols.
I
He's
mean,
one of our
illustrators
childhood.
are legendary. They're
Yeah.
legendary. I mean, the thing is that, I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm not Italian myself, but I grew up watching Italian TV. So I grew up watching some like Mai Dire Gol, for example.
Yeah.
I grew up watching that, as a child, and they were there. They were doing the
Yeah.
theme songs for Mai Dire Gol and C'è sempre l'Inter, for example. They did this kind of fan anthem
Yeah.
for Inter. So I mean, we grew up with that, and then watching Sanremo. They were on Sanremo a couple of times, which is very topical because Sanremo was like last weekend. So yeah, I mean, illustrators are amazing. They are legends. I mean, not
No, no,
only
absolutely, absolutely.
lyrically.
That's why I'm so proud. My band is mentioned alongside that one, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
always
yeah.
like
Yes.
it's one of the dreams that comes true. Like people start mentioning your band alongside your idols, and so say, okay, maybe I
Yeah.
achieved. At least I can say I achieved something. Come on, people are considering me. Wow, now I don't take that for granted, but it's nice. So again, you were mentioning the fact that like in comedy, it's very very typical to make references to jokes and like having jokes that make references to specific traits of the local culture.
Yes,
So
either that. But the thing is, I think what is interesting with metal, and I think this is the whole idea of the paper actually, that there is a different thing as well with heavy metal, especially because heavy metal is also a subculture rather than a culture as well. So by making comedy that is very specifically subcultural, you're also making cultural references in a way, but to a subculture that is also global. So
Yeah.
the same joke will work in Brazil and the Philippines and in Italy. So it's still culturally specific, but it's a different kind of culture. It's a
It's like
subculture.
a transversal. Do you think it works more because it's a niche, like in the sense that people that belong to
Yes.
the metal community sort of feel themselves like outside of the mainstream? There are a larger community which is like scattered, and then they have these
Yeah,
common
absolutely.
things that are not.
Absolutely. The thing is that I've seen, in fact, I mentioned a couple of papers with this. For example, there was one paper that I used in the paper that I referred to that does the same thing with the goth scene, that also has the sort of self-deprecating humor in a way that they make fun of themselves and they kind of, in a way, internalize in a way the humor that other people make about them and use it again in a way. So they make fun of themselves as being always depressed, which
Okay.
is not necessarily the case with goths, but that's the idea that people have about them. But then they use it. They use it as a kind of humor to make fun of themselves. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's something that bands people together in a way because you have a shared understanding of something, which makes it kind of gives you a good feeling that you understand what the humor is. There's this almost exclusive club kind of thing that
I think
I
that's
know what
something.
the reference is.
It's like being part of the club. It's something that gives like metal people like this badge of I'm this part of this like elite or something like this niche.
Yeah,
That's I'm different
yeah.
than others, and that's something I
And
experience.
people
I
can.
think you talk about that, right? At some point you have a paragraph in your paper that's called elitism, right? And it's talking about
Yes,
trueness and being true.
yes. So the thing is that with Tunas, I can open it actually. Let's
Yeah.
see, elitism. Um, so yeah, so in the paper, what I did, you can see from the titles here of the paragraphs. Basically, what I did in this case was that I went through some of the tropes that are specifically metal, but generally, as in globally metal. So something that all metalheads can understand, and how Nanowar uses those ideas for the humor. And one of them is, of course, elitism. Manowar being one of the greatest, in a way, if you want to call it that, greatest band does the super elite kind of
Yeah.
thing. The idea that we're the true metal, true
Yeah,
warriors
yeah,
of
we are
steel
like
or
the top.
whatever they
We
do.
have this 0.01% of the trueness of.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's this idea that we are the only ones that are holding the
Yeah,
flag
yeah,
of
of course. I
metal
mean,
up.
it's
Yeah,
marketing.
sure.
Come on, it's marketing. It's
It is marketing. It is marketing.
it is
But it's the thing is
100%.
that it became something that people understand in a way. They like a metalhead
Actually,
knows what true means.
yeah,
It knows what true means and what is poser. You speak to someone who's not into metal and they try to explain why this band is poser and this band is
they
not.
don't.
I mean,
They're
they're
not
going to think you're an idiot. They're going to
exactly.
think you're an idiot. Like, what the hell are you talking
Yeah.
about?
Well, how would you discriminate some? I mean, this is something I understood later on. Well, actually, when I started Nanowar, I think a few months before starting Nanowar, that it doesn't make any sense to be elitist. Like, why should I
Yeah,
consider myself any better than someone who's listening to,
yeah.
I don't know, any other
And there's
kind of
also
metal?
very specific. There are very specific forms of elitism as well, which is kind of
Okay.
interesting. There's a paper by let's see, it is by Smialek, for example.
Okay.
This paper that is here that is mentioned is this idea of having a number of criteria of what makes something true or poser.
Okay.
So listening to older albums rather than newer albums of a band. I like the first two albums.
Yeah.
Then I'm more elite than you. And it's something that in the song Poser, it comes out. All of these points come out, which was actually really cool. Having reading the paper and then listening to the song, like, yep, they hit every point. Which is it kind of shows that we do it without thinking of it as metalheads. We just know these kind of points.
I think that's part well that might enter into something that is larger than us, but this is something that is like part of human nature. It's like humans have a tribal nature, and so they
Yeah,
tend to group themselves by family, by blood bounds, or and
Yeah,
then can be by religion, culture. And so this is, I think, this kind of thing that you talk about elitism, it's building on a substratum that is pre-existent. It's like predates the culture itself, but it's like this kind of
yeah,
tendency of men towards grouping themselves and like
yeah.
separating themselves is within subgroups, and then conflict, like
Exactly.
having.
In fact, even
Yes.
in fact, in this, you can see it here. There's Con Harris there. He actually calls it a neo tribe.
Okay. Wow.
You
Yeah.
know, he actually calls it a neo tribe. It is a tribe. You know, it's something that is common to us, and that we understand each other, but people outside do not. You know, it's something that we want.
So we got a nice comment here, and I think it's something to deal
Mhm.
with the paper. It says metal
Yes.
trueness. I find it very akin to the so-called toxic masculinity. Don't do this or you are not true, or like don't do this, it's not manly. And it's something that actually like the, let me just say this, but it's the essence of what Nanowar is, because we started like the
Yes.
first thing that we made fun of was Manowar's excessive masculinity. And so I know that you
Yes.
talk about this.
Yes. So I talked about it. Unfortunately, I had to remove some of it.
Okay.
So what happened basically is that the paper ended up being too long. They wanted to shorten all the papers to, or else the publishing itself would be too expensive. It's all very kind of like internal politics in a way of how these things work. But I
By
had
the
to
way,
remove that
just
part.
if someone is interested in the paper, that you can just contact us via through mail, and then if you
Yeah.
have any more questions or stuff, then just get in touch with us, and
Yeah.
we'll be
The
helpful.
thing is that, yeah, originally there was a paragraph that I did, a section that I did about masculinity and homosexuality and all that. I had to drop, unfortunately. But yeah, absolutely. There's this idea of, with Manowar, for example, Manowar kind of try to show themselves as being extremely masculine.
Ah, yeah, woman be my slave.
Woman, but exactly, women be my slave, women and all this, and very
Yes.
macho. But in reality, it's very homoerotic.
Ah, yeah, well, sure.
You know what I mean? It's extremely
I know, I
homoerotic.
know, I know, I know what exactly the kind of pictures you're talking about, but
But not only that, even the idea. I remember there was Metal Headbanger's Journey, that documentary, really cool documentary, that came out quite a few years ago, and I cannot remember who they were speaking to. I think it was Dee Schneider, actually, from Twisted Sister,
okay.
and he was speaking about this, and he said, like, well, metal is all very homoerotic because it's a majority masculine. I mean, now it's changing a bit,
Yeah.
but it's a majority masculine audience. And then there's these masculine men on stage, half naked, and people are looking at them like, oh, they're so masculine, they're amazing.
Okay.
It's like, what's happening here? That's a bit homoerotic going on there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which is okay,
So
but
it's
the thing is that they are claiming, exactly the the opposite,
the
and this kind
complete
of
opposite, exactly, which is all very weird. And the fact that there was this whole thing, this the part that I removed, unfortunately, discuss a bit about this homosexuality and homophobia, unfortunately, in metal,
yeah.
which happens. And I think that's the thing. I wanted to mention it, that Nanowar. I'm sure it's not because the band is homophobic, but it's kind of making
No,
fun of, in
no, no,
fact, the
no, no, of
extreme
course.
fake masculinity that comes with it.
Exactly. No,
And
no, exactly.
sometimes,
But I think, it's like the horseshoe theory, right? When you go to the extreme, then you get to the others
Hmm,
like very easily.
yes,
And I guess that's exactly the case, because you need to balance between the whatever, like maybe masculine, feminine elements or whatever it is. But
yeah,
if you go too much on the one direction, then of course it's like 100% male because you're extreme, like manly, and then you end up being gay. That's
yeah,
basically
yeah, yeah.
the reasoning behind the first albums and then the first kind of jokes. It's something that we don't do anymore. I think like we sort
Hmm.
of exhausted that those
Sure.
themes like in the first albums. But that was like one of the first reactions I had. Like men were so manly and so on, and they brag about themselves being the manliest man on the planet, and then okay, let's just do a parody of these, and
Yeah.
yeah. But
And
anyway,
that's the thing. I think it's that's the thing. It's this idea. I think that's the thing with Nanowar, is that I'm guessing that it's, in a way, this demenziale thing is that you don't expect heavy metal bands, to admit that they're gay.
yeah.
You know what I mean? But then you have these bands saying, "Oh yes, we are absolutely gay." I mean,
Yeah.
at least the characters on
At
within
least the
Nanowar.
characters on stage. I think that's part of what you said before, that it needs to be out of context, right? Because people have
Yeah.
expectations about the kind of performance and the kind of behavior you have on stage, the kind of clothes, and then so we wanted to get rid of that. And so I think you really got the point with that. It's not just in the music, and it's something we did as well with the um, with the stage costumes and with the stage clothes, and so
Yes.
I
Yes.
think
Exactly.
that's exactly it. So coming back to the languages and international, because that's one
Yes.
of things that I really like. I mean, I like it because I'm biased. I'm
Sure.
I like other languages. I like talking about languages and stuff in music. So let me just quote one of these sentences I liked from your paper, and said, the result is that bands like Nanowar are required to be aware of their situation when flirting with international audiences. As a comedy act, the success of their performance is dependent on the delivery of the joke, and presenting a foreign audience with a joke referring to an advert for mattresses on Italian TV has an infinitesimally small chance of landing. And so I wanted just to talk. What's your impression, like, about the fact that we as Nanowar we have this kind of approach with multiple languages? What do you think here? Rightly, you're saying like if you sing in Italian, you won't have a very small chances of success. But what if you sing with both? What is this adding something again? Can you find some, for example, something of our Italian background in the lyrics, in the English lyrics, or
Yeah.
is
I
there some
think. I
insight?
mean the. Yeah, I think the general idea is, of course, the kind of format of the demenziale. So that I can understand, even if it is in English, I can see or anyone really can see the link between the sort of humor that you do with an Elio, for example, right? It's the same sort of musical humor that's going on. So there's definitely that, but I think, and this is something that I'm not sure if you do it consciously or not, but there's a lot of cases, the majority of cases, that if you're doing something that is very specifically Italian, you will do it in Italian.
Ah, yeah,
And again, I don't know if you do it consciously or not, because maybe it makes more sense to do it in Italian, or because the puns work, if you're using puns. But generally, I mean, this is what I found fascinating, and that's what I wrote in the paper. Really, is this idea that language seems to be the one thing that separates the sort of humor that you use when you're doing the song, and it's this use of Italian to land Italian jokes about Italian things that are very
you couldn't do it
specific.
otherwise. I mean, I think you can, but again, you have so many elements that are lost in translation.
Yeah. The one thing that comes to mind, and for example, like bands like Elio Storiatese, for example, they did songs in English, but they did it in a way that is very bad English that would be funny to Italians,
Exactly.
like Christmas with the Yours, for
Yes,
example,
yes,
or
yes,
Peak of the Mountain.
yes.
Like these songs that are literally translated from Italian to
Yeah,
English, word by word, that make absolutely no sense in English, but an
exactly.
Italian would understand exactly what they're saying. So there's that. But in your case, I think it's a bit different in a way. The idea that you use Italian for very Italian comedy, and even in some cases, like trying to think of some songs where you have a song in English but then a phrase in Italian,
Ah, yeah.
right?
That's. I mean, so
Jerry Calan Controtempo, for example.
Jerry Calan.
I
Yeah.
mean, like, it makes no sense. And someone who's not
No.
Italian or doesn't know Italian culture, it makes no sense.
Let's say so. I think this is a reference. I think to Rhapsody, they had some Italian sentences here and there scattered throughout their songs sometimes.
Yeah.
But like, let me say that in general, the way we write lyrics is just, is it fun or not? Like, we just have these metrics that we use, and then if it's fun, it's okay. Then we put it there, like, regardless of the language, regardless of
Yeah.
the. Of course, it needs to sound good and be in the context of the song. But if you have some,
Yeah.
I don't like Dr. Scotti and Norwegian reggaeton. We just put it
Yeah.
there because
Right.
it's fun. There's a lot of random. I think there's a lot of randomness behind the creative process that we have. But
Yes.
it's
Well,
nice
then,
that
for
we can
example, I
try to
mentioned
make
that.
sense. Yeah.
I mentioned it at one point, for example, this is why it's interesting. For example, the fact that in Tutta Cagna, right? So it's a song in Italian, but then there's humor that is not in language, as in it's a musical form of humor, where the solo, it is Tutta Cagna, right? Where the
Yeah,
solo
Tutta Cagna,
is
yeah.
yeah, the solo is the theme song of Casa Vianello, right? Which is an Italian
Yeah.
sitcom from back in the day. But the thing is that even though you could have done that in a song in English, you didn't. You did it in a song in Italian
Yeah,
because you know that Italians will listen to it and understand it. But
of
you could do
course.
it in a song in English and only Italians would understand the solo. But
Yes.
you still chose to do it in a song in Italian. So that's what I found interesting.
Yeah,
This
that's
sort
interesting.
of
I mean, that was also a phase. I mean, that EP was basically all in Italian except for the
yeah
Masterata translation. But and that was a phase that we are writing mostly songs in Italian. Now it's mixed. I would say like now it's it's like, do we like this? Okay, does it work in Italian? Fine. Does it work in English? Fine. Then does it work in Spanish, German? Like with Schwarzwald, it's a joke that
yeah
it works in German. That you can translate
yeah
it, but it doesn't sound the same, right? It's like when you have
yes
these word plays. So it's oh, by the way, so just to there's a comment about Esce no Mirosia, which is yet something different.
yeah
Esce no Mirosia has no fucking sense at all, and I spent 1 week living rent free in my brain. Okay, so the thing is that this song is meant to have no sense. But
yes
not we didn't. So first of all, in case people don't know, we didn't write anything of that song. We just made a cover because it was one of the funniest thing ever, and it's like just misheard lyrics from a it's misheard lyrics from a Iranian songs, from a Persian song. And so like you hear the song in Persian in the original language, and then it sounds like it's in Italian, and then it really makes no sense at all in Italian. But if you would hear someone singing those exact same words in Italian, like seriously, you would laugh. You would laugh your ass off, like we are doing, because then we are. It's something very 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 funny. But it doesn't, like, the lyrics per se, they don't make any sense at all. Just don't try to
no
understand it. It's a lost cause. No, don't even try. Don't even dare. So
So in fact, I mean,
yeah,
you were saying about the songs in German and Spanish, for example. That's another thing that I found very interesting. So I mean, I use this theory, this theoretical framework, so to say, within the paper of using this local and global, and that I found that interesting with the German and Spanish songs and the Serbian and the Russian versions of that song, is that instead of you went global in a way, as in you went to sort of you made the song to be understood globally by doing it locally in different localities. So
yeah,
that's something that you don't see very often. I cannot think of anyone who does that. I'm aware of songs that are translated into Spanish, for example, especially with Italian music.
yeah.
There's quite a lot of artists who did it
Beres
in Spanish,
Ramazzotti.
but mostly it's translations. It's adaptations.
It's a
Whereas in
different
your
thing because
case, you went to
you need to appeal to the humor. You cannot always translate that, especially like with Schwanzwald. There's a word play that
yeah.
you cannot make the same. You cannot play the same game with other languages. So you need to find something which is equivalent, but then it needs to be specific at the same time for other languages. And so I worked really hard to find some equivalencies in Russian, which turned out to be Uzbekistan. And so it's like, and then there is Kitograd in Serbian, and it sort of works the same in the sense that you're taking a specific place and then you change one letter, and then it sounds like you're talking about Cox in this place. So, but
Yeah,
yeah,
and that's
those are not really translations. It's an
no,
adaptation. The
exactly
meaning is always the same,
adaptations.
but then you try to put references to the. I try. I mean, I don't know how much I succeeded, but I try to like put some slang words or some references to movies or people of those places, as
Yeah,
far as I was able to. But yeah,
and that's the thing, like especially when this field in this idea, as I mentioned, of the local and global, I think it's quite a, I would dare say, unique thing of instead of going global by doing it in English, like a lot of other songs that are in English, you'd go global by doing different local versions. which within the framework of local and global actually works amazingly. Like going through it in that framework, like, oh yes, it's global, but by going local in different places, it works great.
So it's hard. I mean, I think it's like, since we're still talking about music, like for us, it was a pain in the ass to have like four versions of the same song, and for me especially was like sort of frustrating to see the fact that, for example, many people would think it was a kind of same kind of operation that Manowar did so many times, like translating that stuff into. Uh, and here, I mean, again, I'm bragging about myself how cool I am, but what the fuck? It's.
Sure, yeah,
I
please.
was working. No, no, it's
Sure.
yes. I was working behind that, and so there's like something. You put so much effort, and then you get thrown into the same bin as something which is completely different. Then yeah, it's. But it's something. I'm happy that you got the point, because
Yeah. And that's the thing.
it's
I think it's
different.
because it doesn't work. It doesn't work for someone who doesn't understand German, for example. I mean, I don't speak German, or Russian or Serbian, so I cannot even think how I could understand the humor. I cannot. I mean, I can understand Spanish, mostly because of Italian, but so I can pick up information. But generally speaking, you have to be local to understand it.
Yeah, yeah. But that's why, that if you look at it as, there's no such thing as an international comedy metal X. Maybe Steel Panther get close to that. But if you look at national metal scenes, so you look at Spain, there's Gigatron and Reno Renardo, and they all sing in Spanish. And there's in France, there's Ultra Vomit. There's JBO, for example, in Germany. Because it's very hard, because to make people laugh, you need to talk about things that they are aware of, like on their daily lives,
Yeah.
that they have some connection with. This is my understanding of it. So
Yes.
there's a lot of philosophizing about talking about Carrefour in the end, but and IKEA.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we can sort of wrap this up slowly. And I just
Sure.
wanted to mention, like, if we go to the conclusions, I think there was this part which I really liked. This quotation, if I can just read it for
Sure.
the listeners. So looking at Nano's juggling act between the different scenes and carefully managing and catering to its implied audience, it is tempting to look at its heavy metal demenziale comedy output and attempt to decipher a movie, be it political or societal criticism behind it. However, the demenziale blah 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 makes already banal lyrics stupid and drags us to an upside down world where the meaning becomes to send back to the sender is an acceptable, senseless search for meaning. Which is a great. Now it's a very long sentence. I realize it right
Yeah.
now, but
Yeah.
bottom line is like, don't look for anything behind. Like, don't look for like social societal criticism, like societal meanings or
No.
anything else. Do you think
No,
so? What do you
absolutely
think?
not.
Yeah, do you think? Do you have any opinion on this? Like, because very much often, there are discussions about like art as a vehicle for some social messages, or do you think it's something we should do? Like, or do you like it? Do you appreciate it more when there is some message behind,
Yeah.
or there isn't?
I think you know what I mean. It's very common, of course, for parody and satire and all that to have a political or societal meaning behind it. But I think you know something like Nanowar or any other of the like heavy metal demenziale or metal rock demenziale, I think that's the appeal. Really, I think the appeal is that it makes no sense. I love that. That's I think what is the appeal for many people is that like this makes no sense. Why is Odin doing furniture now?
Yeah,
It makes no sense. It's. But I think people actually appreciate that a bit more because it makes no sense. It's in a way it's fresh. I think for many people it's fresh that it's art without meaning. In a way, I mean, I'm not in a offensive way. I'm not saying it in an offensive way, but the idea is just there for the sake of humor.
yeah, but let me tell you something. So I think there's something nice. At least we enjoyed it so much when people. We were talking about this also a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about gargoyle, and people over interpret our lyrics, and so they are trying
Yes,
to
yes, yes.
they are trying to read a lot of things that are not actually. At least we didn't plan to be there, that were not planned. If
Yes.
it's like, and then
And I
you
think that's
see
the
the
thing.
gallows.
I think that's the thing with people like who do this kind of paper, which is extreme over analysis of nanowar in this case.
Yeah.
I can understand that it can look a bit pretentious. I understand that, and it's fine. I'll take that. But the thing is that it's not. In this case, it's not looking into meaning behind the lyrics. It's kind of describing what's happening
Oh
within,
no,
for
sure. I
example, the
mean, this paper is
subculture.
very. You're putting us in a context, and you're talking about interactions between the subculture and how does the the.
Yeah.
That's why I think it's you're not trying to do anything here like about You're
No.
not talking about any specific songs. You're just using. You're quoting the songs as to prove your point about the kind of
Yes.
interaction that's there between the local and global, as you said. And so I
Exactly.
think I really enjoyed this, and it's nice to see people appreciating your work. And of course, I cannot thank you enough for doing this. And
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
no, and so I don't know if you want to wrap this up with you have some final statement, or you want to add something to this conversation that is interesting, is worth knowing.
Well, no, I mean, if anyone is interested in doing any sort of metal studies or anything that has to do with studying metal from their own field, it doesn't have to do specifically with language. I would suggest that you check out some of the work within Metal Studies Journal, for example, and the International Metal Studies Society. Just look into it and see what kind of papers are being done and have been done. And it would be great if you can contribute with your own expertise.
Okay, of being a metalhead.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, then I guess thanks a lot again, Karl, for being here, and I
Yeah,
think
thank you very much.
I think we can end it here. And again, thanks for all those that joined the conversation and ask us interesting question or less interesting questions. And see you in the future for the next GattoCast episode.